Hi, I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Welcome to another series of Education One. We have a heavy hitter today, a person I know very, very well. She's an attorney of Connecticut, way of Georgia, who actually was born in South Carolina. Her name is attorney Josephine Miller, and she actually helped me build in one of the prodigies of actually MC² technology. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you, Sam.
I always start off this way of letting the guests tell the viewers exactly who you are, a little background of yourself, and we'll just go from there.
Okay. Well, I am, as you've said, Josephine Smalls Miller.
Okay.
I am here in Connecticut after 23 years, but came by way of St. Helena Island, South Carolina.
Okay.
If anybody knows anything about St. Helena Island, that lets you know that first off, culturally, I am what's known as a Gullah woman. I was born in South Carolina, but then we moved to the lovely town of Savannah, Georgia, when I was just a few months old. And
still history.
It's a lot of history behind all of that.
Okay.
But yes, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, attended the public schools in Savannah. Mm-hmm. And then when I graduated, I attended one of the foremost historically black colleges and universities in this country. That's Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
After matriculating at Spelman, I went on to Georgia State University, got a master's degree there, but ultimately decided to go to law school. So I attended Emory University Law School in Atlanta and attained my law degree there.
We're talking about at least a good 45 plus years of big time schools, name schools, history, genealogy, and one thing I like about this is something about yourself that's actually should be in Black History Month, because what I know about you is that you've been fighting for the rights of minority as a whole. I can put American Indian, I can say Black, I can say Latino, but as a whole, I just say minority as a whole. But this is what I like to ask you the next question. The background of your education, did it instill you to become who you are now, or you always had that in yourself?
Well, let me put it this way. Brown versus Board of Education was decided the year after I was born.
Okay.
So we're talking a long time ago.
Right.
But it was not until my last 2 years of high school that I ever attended an integrated school.
Okay.
So the whole legacy of Jim Crow and what that meant for Southern education, I lived it.
Okay.
But I will say this, that despite the Jim Crow education system, I believe that I got a superior education back in those days, because back at that time there was just something different about the push that minorities such as myself had to become educated. We knew that there was no option but to succeed educationally, because that was so important to breaking through the legal things that had us bound. So I can remember so well some of the teachers that I had when I was in elementary school who really pushed us, even when we were not permitted to go to the public library. We had a segregated library that was for us, but we spent so much time in the library. And once those doors were open for us to attain some things educationally in an integrated setting, I remember those teachers that we had really pushing us. They really instilled in us that we had everything and even more than other people had. So there was never any thought that we could not succeed educationally or professionally, because I want to put it this way. There's really what I call a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you can instill the idea in young people that they can achieve, there's nothing that can stop them.
It seems like we have the tales of two worlds. We have South versus North, how you grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, how things were actually was to me sort of crazy, but you still see these things on PBS, CPTV. It brings back a rage sometimes, but sometimes in a good way that make you persevere as a person. Even though these things were hurtful, even though major people like King and Evers and all these guys actually died, it made you actually go forward. It seemed like it pushed you even more.
Well, I will say this, Sam, even though I've been an attorney for 33 years now,
Okay.
I've also been a lay evangelist for 30 years.
Okay.
So whenever people want to know about who I am
Right.
and the foundation,
Right.
I can talk about the legal side, but even more important is that spiritual foundation that I got, because we grew up going to Sunday school. It was not an option that you could stay home on Sundays.
Right.
So a lot of what you hear coming out of me is based on that spiritual foundation. And one of the things that I remember from the book of Exodus, when it talked about the children of Israel,
Leaving.
when they came out of Egyptian slavery, God said something very interesting to them. He said, the more they afflicted them,
Right.
the more they multiplied and grew.
Uh-oh.
And that's a principle I think we oftentimes don't even understand or recognize. But affliction is not necessarily something that is harmful in the long run. Because what I found is that when you have something that you have to push up against,
Right.
it builds your muscles.
Right.
I think I'm the strong person that I am today because of those things that I had to push against.
I'm going to say this, and you know this is true. When we first met years ago, the enemy was at me. I met you through Prophet Mosley, Dr. Mosley, Pastor Lanier, and other ministers. And you came to me and said, even though I'm an attorney, I'm a minister also. But the comfort level you gave me is I could have reacted just like you said, because you know how I really am. But since I've been with you and Pastor Lanier, I now talk to people. Before, the old Sam would say, well, I guess I'm going to prison. The new Sam today is that I talk to the kids. We're heavily entrenched in kids, helping kids, underprivileged kids. But I say to people to this day, there's a sister that I should have had years ago in New York, but God gave me her now. So you notice when I'm in trouble or something's on my mind, I call you up. And you see the times I call you up late or morning or evening, you're always there for me. And that's what I guess I love you for, because the thing about it is, it wasn't for you, Pastor Nair, Pastor Stan, Naish, and some other people that I truly trust and love, MC Square would never been up. And this is the whole heart of our conversation today, is education. Mm-hmm. You was taught by the best people. You was pushed by the best people. Some of these people may not even be in who's who, but in your heart, they're in who's who.
And I must say that I still have a question in my mind about why we seem to be having such difficulty with educating young people today, because during the time that I was in school, we didn't have the resources that children have nowadays. I remember that we would often get books that were sent over to our school once they had been thrown away by the other people's schools. You laugh, but that was the fact.
But I like how you said it.
But there was such a drive to learn. Right. I can remember that when I was in 6th grade, I had a teacher, her name was Mrs. Douglas. And she would have us one moment studying Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
Okay.
I had to memorize The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere.
Okay.
And I could probably still recite it today.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, she would have us looking at artistic works by Vincent van Gogh.
Okay.
We didn't have the opportunity to go to the art museums, but she would bring the pictures to us. But it was very balanced, because at the same time we were learning the majority culture, she also had us learning Paul Laurence Dunbar's dialectical poetry.
Okay, all right.
So, I mean, it was a wide-ranging kind of education. We didn't do testing back then.
Right.
The only testing we had was the IQ test, and then when we got ready to go to college,
Right.
it took the SAT.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that all of the testing that we're doing nowadays is what is the answer. But I know that when you have good teachers in the classroom, when you
Right.
have motivated teachers, and when you have children who have been empowered to feel that they can learn,
Right.
it's not the resources that make the difference.
You know, I'm glad you said learning. The word learning we're going to stay upon for at least the next 2 minutes. I have learned a lot from you. And you said to me the other day, I haven't spoken to you in a while, you said, Samuel, I haven't heard from you. How's MC Square? I said, well, Josephine, I'm still there. She said, oh, I'm still persevering. I said, I'm never going to give up. And I can't give up because the Stan McCauleys and the attorney Josephine Millers and the other people out there, or the Dale Gustafson, would say, why did you give up? Why you let the enemy stop your glory? Lanier said that. She said before she died, we're going to keep persevering. And she said that the book that I loved out of all was Job. Job endured. I don't know how long, but he said God gave him twice or three times as much. I don't know how long he had to wait, but I look at myself, Pastor said, as Job. And I look at, I'm not Job. I consider myself a Joshua. And even though Joshua was there to bring the people into the promised land, he was given the promised land, Joshua was no joke. He did everything what God told him. And then afterwards, we promised land and all this and Caleb. But I like how you're talking, because you take actually education into spiritual, into education. And you have to learn something between those lines, not to react, not to hurt somebody. Even like the Trayvon Martin stuff, even though it was a tragedy, there's some good is going to come out of it down the road.
Well, Sam, I can say this, that while the people who I have to deal with in the judicial system may not recognize it, but every time I go into the courthouse,
Okay.
every time I go into a judge's chambers, I think about my feet as standing on holy ground.
Okay.
And they're holy because I am.
All right.
I take God with me into the courthouse. Now, I'm not acting unseemly while I'm there. I'm not, shouting or saying anything out of course.
Right.
But I recognize that behind what happens even in that judicial system, there's a spiritual reality. And we as African Americans have to remember our heritage, which is one that this whole civil rights movement was one that was birthed in the church.
Exactly.
I can remember that when I was a youngster, practically every Sunday in church, they would make announcements about the next NAACP meeting. They would have mass meetings where the churches would come together to carry out this plan to not only integrate the educational system, but public accommodations, all of those things that were holding us back. So I don't think that we are doing our young people a service if we forget to remind them of that spiritual heritage that we have. I think that is part of what is missing right now.
I look at education and think that from 85 down to time started, that was actually the foundation. From 85 to the present, something was lost in the mix, and it seemed like the enemy was just chopping down what we built over the years. Now, I'm not saying that the education system was perfect. It was, some things have to be fixed. But today, when I look at the school books or the books that the kids are learning, I have no idea what it is. So what I do, I take books when I was in high school or in college and teach the kids from. Because the thing about it, who does long division today? Who does square roots? Who does fractions and decimal? You go into a lot of colleges today, and the freshmen don't even know what a fraction and a decimal is. So something was lost in the translation. Either start